Hello, everyone. This is Joni McGarry. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so happy to share with you my conversation with Ted Castronova. Ted's a professor of media at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. He is a trained economist, a keen observer of human behavior, a philosophical thinker, and just a delightful conversationalist. We talked about AI, social media, failing institutions, and how those things are reshaping our society and what it means to be human. He tells me of the deep disengagement he's seeing in students post COVID. We talk about his take on what higher education ought to be versus what it is today, and whether anything can be done to reverse that trend, and also the trend of deep distrust of higher education that seemed to arise during COVID. It was a very thought provoking conversation, and I hope you will love it as much as I did. So, without further delay, here's my conversation with Ted Castronova.
Okay.
Welcome, Ted.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on. It's a big honor, and it's a privilege to be invited to just talk about yourself for a long time.
Who doesn't like that?
Yeah, exactly. Other than the fact that you can make a fool of yourself, but yeah. So I guess that I like to introduce myself as a failed economist. So what I mean by that is I'm a person who started out and got a PhD in this very theoretical field of economics. And I got into the 90s and I thought, wow, I just don't want to be doing theoretical things for the rest of my life. And at the time I was playing a lot of video games. I've always been a gamer. So I decided on a lark, I would write a paper about the economics of a video game, almost, tongue in cheek, almost like a joke. And when I finished the paper, it wasn't a joke anymore because I found that this is 2001, people inside of video games were transacting, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of virtual goods.
So, like, for instance, buying a sword or a bucket or a piece of gold or something like that?
Yeah. So you take your gold pieces, you go buy a sword with it, and then I would record it as the economist. I would see it, see the data. And then what I would do is translate those gold pieces into dollars the same way you do like with yen and euros and things like that, because there was an external market between the gold pieces and the US dollar. People were selling gold pieces for dollars. It's an exchange rate. So I just interpolated that into the game and it's like, oh my goodness, it's hundreds of millions of dollars. Or if you want to think about it more concretely, the labor input, the value of the labor input to produce things in virtual worlds was huge. So anyway, the paper really took off. And so I decided to switch from doing sort of theoretical economics to doing something very concrete, which is studying the game industry. And so I got a job in the media school here at Indiana, and I've been doing it ever since.
So, when you say the game industry, you mean computer or virtual games versus like a Monopoly game?
Yeah, so all the stuff that I've been studying is in the computer area. Yeah,
Okay.
although you can see behind me, I really like board games. So you could, in principle, do the same thing, but in a board game context. But board games aren't persistent. And the thing that really struck us in the early 2000s was that there were video games that were going online and then were staying there. So people were spending years just in their video.
Play, Playing the same game. So now you're teaching media at IU, and that's probably a very popular area with a lot of students. And so you see a lot of things. You've seen probably a change in the student body as we consume more media. Can you tell us more about that? What do you teach? What's popular? What changes are you seeing?
So I've been teaching in our game design program because it turns out another thing is that economic theory, you just sort of flip it on its head and it becomes a theory of making games. So, like in economic theory, we're always building models of what does the agent do facing these prices with this income. Well, what does a game designer try to do? Set up a situation where the player has an interesting choice to make facing these prices with this income. So
Hmm.
it's very similar, and I've been teaching in there. Um, and I've found since COVID especially, um, wow, just students' willingness to do work out of class has gone down. They're it's
You
very
mean like homework?
yeah, like, especially if it's just reading, you know,
Ah,
read this book, uh, keep up, read your chapters and everything. Because when I was an undergraduate, I remember, we had hundreds of pages of reading that we had to do,
sure.
and you tell them that they have to do it, and then they come to class and they haven't, and they don't seem to feel like, "Oh, I should have gotten that done."
Or
They're
really
"Oh, no, I
ashamed.
didn't do that." So it's more like it's not like they're lazy, it's just they evaluate everything like, "Well, would it be worth it to me to read this? I don't think so, so I'll just not read it." And so I think there's this underlying malaise that they're not invested in whatever it is we're presenting. They're just not they're
And
not excited about being in college, put it that way.
and you said especially since COVID, did you
Mm.
see a big change then? Do you think it what do you think about the COVID situation engendered this shift? Do you think it was the virtual learning or just the punishment of not having any kind of society?
Yeah, I had the fortune or misfortune of having one child in high school, the other in, actually both of my kids were in high school at that time. Uh, One was a freshman, the other was a senior, and, I just observed that they were doing nothing. They were getting A's, everybody was getting A's, the teachers weren't doing anything, the students weren't doing anything, and I think they realized, "Wow, it's absolutely no difference in the world if I study hard like I was or if I don't." And I don't mean like I get the same grade, I get an A either way. It's like I'm still the same person. They weren't actually teaching me anything, right? So, whether or not that is true, I think that
Right.
attitude is just I am not feeling the absence of education, and I think that permanently lowered everyone's expectation about what is the education system actually doing for the students. So I watched them just sit there and the teacher would say, "Okay, watch this video," and they just turn their screen off and it's never recovered. The students then that I have now
Yeah.
had that when they were, let's see, 5, just so they would be like middle school. And I
Oh,
think they
wow.
coasted through high school and they're coasting through college.
So what do you, think would be the remedy to something like that? Like, how it's a giant problem and you don't turn that ship around very quickly, but do you see any hope with that? Do you think there's any kind of reform of the education system or our society that would start to move something in another direction? Not that I'm saying everyone has to go to college, because I think it's become
No.
clear that many, many people who do perhaps might be better off and happier doing something else versus a traditional college education. But still, one would think that if you're going to spend time and money going to college, you would want to be somewhat invested in it.
Yeah. I have fairly strong feelings about that.
I'd love to hear them.
I think that uh first of all, no one is getting the traditional college experience. So to me, the traditional college experience is you go to this environment and you start with Plato and
Mhm.
you imbibe the entire Western tradition by the time you graduate. That to me is well, I think of it as the education that the founders received. Okay. No
Mhm.
one is getting that. They're coming to a college like Indiana, and I think almost all of them say the entire humanities is a waste of time. I'm
When you
going to
say them, you mean the students say
the
that.
new student, yeah, the
Mhm.
students because the enrollments in English and history classics are just tiny. Everyone's in business. Everyone's in
Mm.
informatics. And I'm not gonna criticize them because what the humanities departments are doing is not humanities. They're doing politics and ideology. I mean, if you just look at the course offerings in the political science department at Indiana University, I think you would be right in saying, if I don't share these politics, these courses do nothing for me. And from my perspective as an older person, I'm like, not only, maybe they would be fun for you if you have those politics, but the point is you are learning nothing about governments. For example, where are you learning about the cycle that goes from tyranny to oligarchy to democracy and back to tyranny, right? That was discovered by the Greeks. Where are you learning that? So, I think universities have transformed themselves into money-making vocational schools with a ton of bloat. If that's what they're doing, there's an incredible amount of bloat going on. It could be done so much cheaper.
Mhm.
So I think higher education, uh, so let me 2 stages. 1, it's gotta change or it's not gonna survive.
Mhm.
Okay, so the higher education thing is a bubble and it's gonna collapse, and the trust in higher education is plummeting,
Well, that's
okay?
for sure. Yes.
And so now our question is, will they change? So I can tell you from the inside, having made good faith efforts to get other professors to understand we can't keep doing it this way. I can tell you nothing will change.
Mhm.
Nothing will change. Universities will not reform from within. And so I predict just very painful collapse in the entire sector.
Well, this is an area I'm very, very interested in because you're laughing, but I'm totally with you on everything you just said from an outsider's perspective. And during the pandemic, I did a lot of work in trying to end college COVID vaccine mandates on a national
Sure.
level. So I was
Right.
very interested
Good for
in the
you.
ac-
Thank you.
in Oh, well, you're welcome. In the academic space, I was very interested in that, and so I was dealing with a lot of parents and students who were subjected to this anti-scientific, harmful tyranny, and we were writing hundreds and hundreds of letters to every single trustee on boards across the country, dealing with administration, and they either completely ignored our very well argued position, or they would just spit back, CDC talking points, and it became so clear that they really weren't interested in the inquiry and the truth. They just were sort of carrying out a policy. And furthermore, that most of the professors, very much most of them, and academic administrators were very much on the left or they were progressive politically. And it turned into a political issue. So you are in an interesting school right now because Indiana University is undergoing changes at the board of trustee level and also in the
Mhm.
offering of major levels because our governor and our legislature have made some new laws that will govern Indiana University in a different way. So when you say they're not going to change from the inside, do you see these outside changes of the appointment of new trustees, the change in the number of, like the requirements to have a major? Do you think that's going to change anything? Do you think there'll be a shift in the hiring to have more diversity of ideas of people who are teaching?
I'm not optimistic. So, uh, there's this back and forth. I think we're kind of at a crisis point, today, Thursday, July 17th. Within the next 6 months,
At
the
Indiana
first
University or generally at
in
IU?
just
Okay.
here at
Yeah.
IU.
Hmm.
Um, so we have new trustees. Maybe we'll get some more new ones. How I think the legislature has tried in good faith to let's pass some laws and send a signal down there to Bloomington. You gotta do something differently. And what's happening here is a lot of more or less smug professors saying, "Oh, what? Don't worry about it. We'll just move this thing over here, move that thing over there, and it satisfies the requirements, and we'll be good." In
Hmm.
other words, they're not really say. I've been saying for years, this is a state university. You cannot continue to poke the taxpayer in the eyeball and expect to, have all the benefits that you have.
Right.
No one respects your expertise. No one, they don't listen. And when I say they, of course, it's generalizing. There are some people who understand. I'm talking about specifically like the dean of the college.
Hmm.
I watched him do a town hall where he was just reassuring everyone. I know they say they're cutting programs. We're going to move something here and there, and don't worry, it won't have any effect. And I'm like, well, wait until the legislature. gets that where you're saying, "Yeah, I know they want us to do this, but I'm not gonna." And so that's sort of the general attitude, which means the trustees are going to have to sit here and say, "Are we gonna have to take this place over fully and start, you know, breaking some chairs?"
Mhm.
So it depends on what the trustees decide that they learn. If they decide that they learn that the people at IU are flexible and they're, willing to do things, well, then it'll go one way. But if they find that they're being sort of deceived, if not directly lied to,
Mhm.
they'll have to decide, like, are we going to create a revolution down here or what? And I think, frankly, Indiana, if I don't know, the legislature in Iowa tried to do this, same problem. Michigan, same problem. Any big state school system, if the legislature decides they want to change something and they're very unhappy, it it's very hard to change higher
Mhm.
education from outside.
Well, I think I get the sense, having lived here for over 20 years, and I'm not an academic, and I'm not, my husband isn't, my son went to college, our other daughters went. Um, I get the sense that there's this mindset that, the academic establishment is above and better
Mhm.
than any other kind of establishment, unless the other kind of establishment believes what they believe, which is increasingly left ideology. And I don't even like to think in left and right terms anymore. I mean, I think that the pandemic and everything that happened kind of broke me of that, and
Yeah.
seeing that it's all such theater everywhere that I'm not going to hop on either team, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. I
but
agree.
I think that the education thing is particularly fraught because there's an arrogance on the people teaching, and this idea that what they're doing is so important, and they have to do it their way. Otherwise, these rubes and these, mouth breathers who care about the bottom line, perhaps, or about teaching what made our country possible and once great, that's somehow anathema to somebody getting a liberal or, an education nowadays.
Yeah, the arrogance or the let's use it, the sense of
Entitlement?
yeah, I'm trying to come up with a word. Like, I think in many ways, I'm very proud to be a professor. I'm just going to say that. It's a lot of work to become a
Mhm.
professor.
Oh gosh, yes.
But at the same time, from day one, I recognized what I was doing was a tremendous privilege, that I was so buried in privilege from the society that they were giving me this tremendous contract and entrusting me
Mhm.
with all these young people and entrusting me with expertise. Like, we're not supposed to get things done right now. We're supposed to get them done right.
Mhm.
And we can take 5 years to reflect on something. We're allowed to do that. Nobody else gets to do that. So I've always felt that way. But and it's not about a bottom line. See, again, if I sit with other professors and I say, well, the taxpayers are not happy, the parents are not happy, so we need to do. And they go, "Oh, you're just being vocational. You're trying to turn us into a trade school." And,
But
and
there
it's
are
like, well, when I
financial
say bottom line,
realities.
what's that?
There are financial realities.
Yeah, but I would
Yeah.
also say, okay, never mind the vocational stuff. Let's just talk about the humanities. Maybe what they're mad about is that not only are you teaching a false anthropology, but, you're not allowing anyone to teach anything else but
Mm.
your anthropology. So it's not about vocational, it's like you're not doing education correctly. You're not giving anything of value even to the student who just is interested in the life of the mind, right? You're just they walk out of the university, they come in with common sense, you rob them of their common sense, and so they're worse off when they exit the university when they go. So, and they're just they believe, as you said, that their position is special, and
Mhm.
they can't no one outside of us is allowed to assess whether or not we're doing well, because what do they know? Right? I know, they don't
Yeah. It's a
know. And
conundrum. It
yeah,
really is. I'm watching it very closely because I have friends who are very horrified at the changes that are being made, and I happen to live actually in the very same neighborhood as the provost, and I wanted to, engage them about it, but I haven't yet, to try to understand their perspective. But anyway, that's a little, I'm very interested in that topic. I'm also interested in hearing what you're observing or seeing with students, on their relationship to social media, to their phones, to AI. Like, what is that interface looking like? Because again, when I read your book, it really changed my, experience of the internet and AI, and, I'm wondering what you're seeing in terms of how young people are responding to this crazy rapid rate of change that we're experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of an age where I remember it seems like yesterday that we drove to the store with no phone.
Well, I remember when ATMs didn't exist. So,
Oh, surely not
yeah.
you.
No, surely me. I'm right on the cusp of boomer, but I remember the first
Okay,
ATM. But yes, I
yeah.
remember when we did lots of things without phones, but go on.
I did an informal survey recently. I'm going across the university, and I'm counting how many people are truly disconnected, who are just walking along. People are now starting to walk looking at their phones or
Mhm.
they have earplugs in. It's about 70% right now. Um,
Wow.
I have difficulty getting students off their devices in the classroom, extreme difficulty to the point where I stopped trying.
Wow, that's
Uh,
so sad.
well, I started developing the themes in the book several years ago, and I'm sad to say that everything I thought was going to happen is happening.
And tell me more about that. Like when you say you developed the themes, let's just pivot to that. Tell me what you wanted to write about, what called you to write about this. Tell us about the book, which is again not published, it's still in draft form. It's called Dewey.
Right. So let me
Or
here let's just talk about I can explain where the
okay.
title comes from
Okay.
maybe in a minute. But, here's what I think is going on, and this was sort of the start of my thinking. We tend to view artificial intelligence as a kind of a technical threat and an employment threat, right?
Mhm.
It's gonna replace jobs. But I think the real threat is actually literary, and I'll unpack that. What I mean is that and I get this from having studied video games, right? When you study video games, you see how a virtual reality environment can lock into the brain and hold people.
You mean
And
like
I
there's somebody just wanting to keep playing and playing and playing. So it's sort of
anybody who's had a
yeah,
teen boy knows what I'm talking about,
yeah.
right? You've all had that situation where you had to go and unplug the machine. And right? And girls, so that's boys, but girls, they got the phone and they're just constantly making themselves miserable looking at media
Oh, compare and despair on Instagram
and
and on
pair and
TikTok,
despair.
and it's a terrible thing, yeah.
And then we have to understand, well, right now, so this is before AI, there are these companies that make billions and billions of dollars by, satisfying the consumer, which is what we want.
Mhm.
However, here, satisfying the consumer is purely engagement. All they want are the eyeballs. They don't care if you feel good or bad. They will play, like I've seen in video games, they play with, you know, moods of exhilaration, depression, frustration. They're playing you like a flute with the only object being keep the person coming back.
Hmm.
They play with the social networks that you have there, keep them coming back. So now throw AI into that. And I think AI is going to create environments, interactive experiences that are so compelling, narratives, you know, General Hospital, forgotten relic, right? AI is going to develop things that, storylines and there's already formulas for these things. AI will perfect it. And so I started thinking, what is the future? The future is going to be people in chairs. It's not that unemployment may be bad. I'm not saying that's not a problem. The real
Right.
problem is most people just won't wanna do anything but stay hooked in,
Mhm.
and all the trends indicate that's going on.
Mhm. And so when you started seeing alarms of this, and I agree with you completely, I think it's a real problem even among adults on Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
You just kinda because you don't wanna miss anything or, it really it hooks you in and addicts you, and
Mhm.
what I realized, and not that I didn't sort of know this before, but through reading your book, I thought to myself, "Huh, unless I know somebody personally, I don't even know if they're human."
Nope.
They seem human, people posting things to engender outrage in somebody, but I don't know because 'cause they're not somebody I've met in real life or I've talked to on the phone or something like that. So, you're seeing this happen, you're seeing I call it addictiveness of games, um,
Mhm.
and then you think, "Well, I'm gonna write about this in a novel format." I mean, you're not a fiction writer. You that
No,
wasn't that would no, I'm not saying, "Well, you're not a fiction writer," but it wasn't
I may
something
not
that
be even now.
but
I'm a
I
garbage writer.
no, you're not. There's a really good storyline in there, but it made you want to write a book about this.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. So I've kind of gone my own way in my career, and I got tired of writing these didactic books where, chapter 1, "Listen to me, there's this terrible problem, and this is what you gotta do, and this is what's gonna happen." And I thought, uh, I've achieved everything that I wanted to achieve with my career. I'm happy. I like teaching more
That's
than
great.
anything. And I'm teaching and I'm just overjoyed. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be funny if kind of like the same thing, wouldn't it be funny if I wrote an economics paper about a video game? I said, wouldn't it be funny if I tried to embed my thoughts about this in a novel
Mhm,
and just see what happens? And just because I mean, in a novel, you know, you're sending these messages through a story. It's not
mhm,
through like citations and
mhm,
long form logical arguments. You're helping people to grasp something at a different level. And I thought, wow, what a great challenge. So I just and also you can let your creative juices fly.
mhm.
So that's how I came up with the name. I mean, I just came up with the idea of a donkey who lives forever. And I think one of the cutest names for donkeys is Dewey. And so this I have this donkey who's is an immortal donkey, and he's seen human history, and he kind of relates here and there how technology did this and that and the other. So he's kind of the memory,
Mhm.
but he lives in a village where these people face a crisis involving their way of life and the internet. And
And it's
and
somewhere in the future, and yet the village feels very medieval.
yeah,
And if I can just sort of paraphrase, the dilemma is that somewhere in the future, the um, the hive, which you call it, like the Borg, the machines have taken over, and it's lured all of the humans in to be in chairs to experience virtual reality, and they ultimately die. So it's sort of like the dead internet along with
mhm,
that. But in order to retain your humanity, there are these villages that are cast here and there, but we're concerned with one village, and they live as Luddites would, right? They don't really make use of machines or technology. It's almost like an Amish kind of thing,
yeah,
but yet and it's a religious community. It's
right, yeah,
is it Saint Bern?
Saint Isidore,
Isidore. It's a Catholicism that's centered around the Eucharist, and the
yeah.
message there is, you have to have that in order to keep the body sacred and not merge with the Borg.
Right.
Correct.
So, yeah, you've really summarized it
Well, I
nicely.
read it.
Yeah, but, so I thank you. So there's one difference between so I'm imagining in the future there are gonna be communities that are not living in the internet. But there's one big difference between those communities that will survive and, let's say, the Amish or Luddites, which is I don't think a community will be able to persist if it doesn't keep an eye on the internet and defend itself actively from the internet. In
And
other
in
words,
this book, that happens.
yeah, the internet, you can see it already. It hunts you. It sends reminders. It sends notifications. It uh things pop up where you don't expect them. I just 2 weeks ago drove from Indiana to Michigan. I get into Michigan, and here on my Twitter feed is an ad for a Michigan politician.
It's
Like
something.
the world knew, the hive knew where I was and
Mhm.
sent some. So, and anybody who tries to stay away from it will receive more attention. And the goal for people to not end up in a chair is to not be noticed. It's just I would like for the internet to ignore me and let me just do my thing over here.
And you don't think that you can, not you personally, but that one can just say, "I'm just gonna unplug, I'm just gonna go away and try to ignore it."
Yeah,
Because I
try it.
actually don't think that works because your environment's gonna change as a result of increasing technology, the things
Yeah.
you can and can't do in the world. I
Yeah,
don't
one
think
of my
it's really
favorite
possible to live off the grid completely anymore.
right. One of my favorite, examples of this, the car. The car has completely transformed how we live, hasn't it? Now, did humanity sit down in 1910 and say, "Let's have a conversation about, how we wanna live," and, "Oh, yeah, we wanna live with suburbs and unwalkable cities and highways and traffic and smog. We want that, so let's choose car." No, the way
No, I'm
technology
laughing because it's absolutely true. It makes
right? The
the
way
right point.
technology it's like it becomes this experimental thing for some people, then it becomes popular, and each individual person makes a choice. Yeah, this would be better for me. When the smartphones came, mom said, I would like to know where my child is. This device allows me to know that. Here's this device. But then when enough people do it, it becomes mandatory.
Mhm. Well, yeah, because then kids can't have any kind of society without their phone because they can't text, they get excluded. It's a whole movement now to try to
Yeah,
try to decouple kids from those phones.
right. And
But
I
you're
don't
right, it all happens little and a little and a little and then all at once.
yeah. I mean, having written the book I read, don't you think I would love to throw this thing out the window? But I won't know what's going on if I do that.
Right.
So I need to, it's my job as a professor,
Right.
a so-called expert, to try to keep up on the themes that are concerning me. So I can't live without it.
Well,
How
and that gets to a question that, I have all the time lately, which I think a lot of people probably share is, like, how do you live in this world? Because it is the world we have. This is the time we're in. How do you live in the world? Observe all of what's happening,
right,
discern what is true or isn't true, or try to discern it from all the information coming in, not be constantly manipulated by it. How does one do that and still maintain their humanity? Because I find like AI is so seductive, because it can do so many things and the internet is so seductive. How do you skirt that line?
I think the monks developed the answer hundreds of years ago. In order to be more human and to more fully achieve your humanity, you must deny yourself. So it's about self control. And I know our society is not big on denying self and self control, but and so I actually think messages of be yourself, do what you want are messages that make people miserable. Just setting the internet aside, I think, what people need to hear is encouragement to control yourself.
Mhm.
And so it's practices of self denial and self control that would allow someone to live with this without being dominated by it. How many people, though? See, that was another thing I thought is like, okay, even if the message gets out, how many people are like, we already have the message that we shouldn't be fat, but look at me, right? If you saw my belly, you go, message not getting through. So, um, they the y- you know the number of people who will be able to resist, I believe, is small,
Yeah.
and it would involve something kind of hierarchical and authoritarian. In other words, a parent saying to the child, "No," or if you let's say you're in an Orthodox Jewish community, and rabbi says that's it, and then you would be like, well, it's a religious commitment of mine
Mhm.
to do what my rabbi recommends, and I'm Orthodox, which means I'm very strict,
Mhm.
right? So that might be a way for people to resist it, but it's like you have to resist. You just have to.
Mhm. Well, I think and that goes up to a whole another level, a whole additional level of societal malaise. In that, how are kids raised now? What are I think the family has been intentionally decimated for
Yeah.
years, and I think about me, like, 20, 30 years ago, if somebody had said that to me, I would have been like, "Oh, you're so old-fashioned," and,
Yeah, me too.
I would have sneered at those people, and now I realize that, do whatever you want, be an individual, live for yourself. It's the road to ruin of not only the person, but also our society. And so it's such a challenge to raise your children to have that kind of discipline and self control when everyone around you and all the forces around you are working so hard against that.
Yeah,
Especially with the immediate gratification of social media and gaming. And, do you have any secrets on that? As a parent, as a professor,
yeah.
is it hopeless? Do you
Well,
think
here's
do you think there's a shift back in that direction?
yeah, I think there is. Here's a more sympathetic take that I've taught myself, which is in 1945 and again in 1968, humanity embarked on an experiment. Right? We said, what happens if we just overthrow the hierarchies, let people make their own choices, give them good information, and let them, for example, build their families however they want. Let them educate themselves however they want, et cetera,
Tell
et
me
cetera.
what about those dates? Tell us more about those
Oh,
dates
well,
when
1940, I think culture changed dramatically in 1945 with the end of World War II.
okay.
And so we have this massive reaction against everything that Nazism represented.
Mhm.
Hierarchy, let's all be together in the tribe, all this.
The
Um,
Volk.
yeah, yeah, Das Volk and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and then in 1968, it was the next generation saying, even you yourselves that won World War II, you were hierarchical and
Mhm.
authoritarian and like in my faith, Catholicism, there's this accusation that that the generations in 1950, they just mindlessly worshiped saints and, they prayed to pieces of toast and, did whatever the priest said. And it's like, let's toss all that away.
Yeah.
I think that's a reasonable experiment, but I think the results are in. The
Yeah.
results are, as you say, just unhappy people. I look in my classroom, Joni, and I see unhappy people ultimately. Now, I happen to teach in a different environment as a volunteer, which is a classical school. They teach Plato, Aristotle, those sorts of things. They teach Latin. They do all this stuff. They have school uniforms. Those kids are happy. They're not smarter than the kids out here, but they their behavior is aligned
Yeah.
with what we know as older people leads to a good, solid, content, joyful life.
And this is a school, it's an in-person school,
Yeah,
and it's for, like, K through 12 kind of people?
yeah.
Okay.
It's basically a bunch of amazing and wonderful moms who were homeschooling
Mhm.
and said, let's get together and make a co-op. And
Mhm.
this, by the way, this form of education is booming.
Yes, I think it really took off during, COVID
Oh,
for
absolutely.
many reasons, but
Yeah.
all of them good and
So I
ultimately.
teach, I teach, for example, American history. Guess who's a hero in my class? Thomas Jefferson, George Washington. Okay, these people are heroes.
Right.
Abraham Lincoln, memorize the
Yeah.
Gettysburg Address.
Yeah.
So, and also in history, I can go in history and say the period that was dominated by Christianity and the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages was a wonderful period. Lots of amazing things happened.
Mhm.
Science was born there,
Mhm.
right? The rational inquiry into the God's universe. So I'm able to sort of teach them that way, and they're happy. And the kids I have in my classroom are not happy. And I've lost the thread. What was all that
Well,
supposed
I
to be?
lost the thread too because it's also interesting. I think it's, just that the whole societal, shift of people not having rules and regulations and,
Right. Yeah.
and I don't like tyranny, believe me, and like, it's just hard to find the tension, and I think also in COVID, in when you just what I learned is if you have a line that you're drawing and of
Mhm.
anything, whether it's bodily autonomy or whether it's you're not going to behave this way in your relationships or you're not going to eat these things or spend these things, once you give up some ground, you are not going back
Mhm.
to the line.
Yeah.
And so we've been moving our society very relentlessly over the past, well, probably forever, but certainly since the 60s and
Yeah,
the early 1900s. And people don't regain that ground, even though at the time a change seems very reasonable and humane and the right thing to do.
right, and it's you can see there's the contradiction of freedom here
Right.
because the more you tell people do whatever you want, the more law you have to put on them if you want them to do a specific thing,
Hmm.
right? If
And
they're
also,
not following.
they don't know who to be. There are no
Yeah,
mores or
or
customs.
yeah,
Yeah, it causes anxiety.
and I think that, what people need to understand is there's such a thing as duly constituted authority that you should be able to trust. That's why COVID is so incredibly tragic, is in that our sense of these duly constituted authorities and experts completely not only did they fail at their job, they transformed the office they were in to doing a different job, which was to impose control
Hmm.
without any good reason. So we had our experts, you know, conform in this really weird sort of unthinking following of these things. I knew in like March of 2020 that everything, this is the truth over here, and I can't get anyone over here to even think about it. Are professors supposed to be like that? No.
Well, they were,
It's supposed
but they seem to be especially like that. And
yeah,
what I find really amazing is that, like, we talk about the trust in institutions, shattered by all that. When people I know, many people who experienced the COVID and lockdowns a very different way than I did. They thought, "Well, they did the best they could. They didn't know. It was for our safety." And still, there is no acknowledgement that, "Whoa, this deserves a bigger look because it is not as it appeared, and there was a lot of damage done, and they knew early on, and they kept doing it." Like, just one example on the myocarditis caused in young men by these shots. It's not that they didn't know when they continued mandating vaccines and boosters at the college, they knew. That information was there months before they imposed those mandates, so that's just one tiny example. I still find that people aren't awake to that, or they just don't wanna talk about it, or it's over, it's behind us, and, yeah, that's a little off the thread too, but
no, but I
it's
think it's an example of dereliction of duty
yeah,
of the doctors, right? Do no harm. You're supposed to sort of follow your oath regardless of consequences. Did they do that? No.
no.
They were much more interested in conforming to what everyone expected of them. Professors, experts. That's why you have all these privileges, so that you have the freedom to stand up and tell the truth,
Mhm.
even if it's uncomfortable. Did professors do that? No. They all thought that conforming was more important than the truth. They didn't see, when you're a professor, you're supposed to investigate things that don't make sense.
Yeah.
And if somebody tells me, like, my one of my favorites is the origin of the virus. And then it was pretty clear, like, wait a minute, where do you get a fur and cleavage site out of a wet market in Wuhan? And there's a viral lab in Wuhan. This
Hmm.
needs to be looked into. And everyone's just like, no. And I'm like, well, you're not being a professor.
Right.
And personally, I'm like, you don't deserve the job. You don't deserve the job if you're just here to go to cocktail parties and say what you're supposed to say. Just no. Go teach in a high school or something, but the professor job is for people who think.
Well, it
And then
it
and then and then the third one, since I'm in a media school, the journalists, you're supposed to
oh.
be cynical and investigate. Don't trust what you hear. And
Especially
instead,
from the authorities.
yeah, they become
Especially.
voluntary propagandists.
Mhm,
And, like, I work in a media school. I
mhm,
work with other people who, through that whole period, never, these are journalism professors, never said, "We need to have a panel about how the New York Times is failing the nation." Nothing
mhm,
like that. And they still haven't done it, and they still, like you talked about with your friends, there's never been a reckoning. There's never been a sense of, we were led down the garden path by the Washington Post and the New York Times
yeah,
about COVID and many other things.
mhm,
If the people in my building have no idea why anyone would be angry at NPR. How could anyone be angry at NPR? So, again, you're in a bubble like that. That's not you're journalists, you're supposed to be our advocates, and you let us down tremendously to
Yeah.
great harm.
Yeah, it was interesting because during the pandemic, we had um, there were some people who published a paper about the harms of boosters in college students, and those authors were willing to be interviewed by student newspapers, and they were credentialed people, very credentialed people, and so we. Crafted a letter to school newspapers. We got the editors. We sent that out with an author with, "Here's this, your school mandates boosters. Would you like to interview and talk to the public, the researchers that put this paper together?" Not one school, not one
Yeah.
student even responded. And I just thought, wow, they're really training them like they have trained them now, in what we're seeing. So,
Well,
how do you
I think there's been a change in the way these communities evaluate truth. Once upon a time, everyone was okay with the uncomfortable moment where one person would say to the other, "I think you're wrong, and
Mhm,
here's why."
mhm,
Now, you go to meetings and it's like in a typical academic talk, let's say in communications, everyone sits politely and claps at the end. There's no intellectual back and forth really of any depth. And it's because everyone just wants to get along.
mhm.
It's let's get along and feel good together. And it's like, I'm sorry, you can't you can do that on your own time. You've been employed as a professor, you're supposed to, or you're employed as a doctor, you're supposed to stand up and say
Yeah.
uncomfortable things.
And 2 questions. Do you think that people aren't standing up because they truly don't get that there's something wrong, or they just go along with the narrative? And I'll give an example. Um, I actually sat with somebody in the informatics school and tried to talk to him about the term misinformation, and I wanted to be able to bring in somebody who, like an Andrew Lowenthal, who's studying the management of misinformation, the observatories on social media, all of that kind of thing that, in my mind, really contribute to censorship. I
Absolutely.
knew a lot of people who were censored,
Oh,
and
absolutely. We
they're
found out
also
in 2022 how this was happening
yes,
through
and
the
so
Twitter files and Matt Taibbi. I mean, it's like all of a sudden I was like, that's what it was. They were censoring social media. Sorry to
no, they absolutely were, and all of this was true, and I could get nowhere with this person who, and then went on to say how evil, just their view of anybody with a different perspective was that they're stupid and also spreaders of misinformation. And I think at one point, the top 10 misinformation sources were all like far right or conservatives. And I wanted to say,
know.
well, what are the chances of that? Like,
Yeah.
what are the chances of that? Just because somebody says something you don't agree with, or even if it's outrageous.
Yeah.
A-
Well,
And, also, I'm just a 1A absolutist, which it these people are not. They are not. And I wonder if that's gonna continue on at schools, but that's a different conversation.
well, so just it's kind of a challenge to open up the skull of, let's say, an academic or a journalist today and find out. Like one of the things I understand about journalists is they didn't used to come from the elite. Now they do.
Right, they used to be scrappy with their notebooks, and now they're
Oh,
all Ivy League
now
yeah,
they're all Ivy League. But,
yeah.
but we have to ask ourselves, why are the elites so closed to these alternate ways of viewing the world when normally they pride themselves on their open mindedness and beliefs? And it's got to be because these other ways of thinking are deeply threatening. And for
Mm,
this, I would like to go back to 1945. Our worldview is formed by a reaction to the events of those times. And let's just say I'll just take this as an example. It's a silly example. Before the period 1914 and 1945, there were kings. Can you imagine there being a king now? Right? It's not conceivable.
like an actual king, not just
Like
a
actual
titular king, yeah.
So, and it's because after 1945, we're like, that entire past is gone. And so it's
Mhm,
almost like you're that like, let's say huge swaths of the population are becoming royalists. And in a very common sense way, they're just sort of saying, I've kinda seen and I think we get more oppression when we turn things over to technocrats than when we turn it over to some guy, who at least is a human being. He's not a technocrat, he's not a AI. Um, and can you imagine being a pediatrician or an informatics professor, confronting this possibility that monarchy would be the right and you could see they're like, "No, no, 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 they can't,"
Yeah.
you know?
But I can see an argument for it, because you think, well, at least if you had somebody and it's a fantasy really, but who
Yeah.
was truly brought up to care about their nation and did right by the people,
Yeah,
hell,
they
I
thought of
mean
themselves as a friend of the people, I
right.
don't know. Most people who voted for Donald Trump, to my knowledge, don't really like him, but, I nobody's like, "Oh, I wanna have a beer with that guy." I mean, some people do, but
No, I think
the
a
thing
lot of
is
people feel they well, there's a hero cult worship,
yeah,
but
there's cult worship, but it's like he's got this he projects this aura of being a friend of the people, for
mhm,
better or worse,
right.
and, the people in our elites just cannot. Well, here's another reason why they cannot. Remember earlier I was talking about they haven't been trained well, they don't know Plato, they don't know
Mhm.
Aristotle, they don't know Plutarch, they don't know the Western tradition at all.
Well, and also there's an active movement to destroy the Western tradition because,
Oh,
the patriarchy,
right,
the
in
yeah,
the service of some ideas that may be very good ideas, you toss out Western civilization, now you can't understand what a Trump is.
yeah,
You don't even know what a monarch is.
yeah,
You don't even all you know is experts are supposed to run things.
mhm,
That's all you know. And I think the reason that even reasonable people can't come to grips with the realities around COVID, just to stick with that. The reason they can't come to grips with it is because it's just too deep a disruption.
mhm. And also, do you think it also disrupts their notion that the people who are really in charge may not be so benevolent and,
Or
and they may not or competent? I think it's both. I mean, I think if they were
so
just incompetent, it would fall our way occasionally, right?
I had a former student visit me just a month ago, and he was in the biotech sector in Boston when COVID was happening. And he said he could not believe it how, like, every biotech medical expert in the world suddenly closed their mind. They just completely closed their mind and just went to this other thing. And he we have a mutual friend, another student and he said, I had to get Tom here. It took me 2 weeks to deprogram him.
Yeah,
I
I'm
I I
surprised he
sat with him
could.
for 2 weeks to deprogram him from this stuff. And so when people are operating on this kind of deprogramming, it means there's a lot at stake here, a lot of what's right and wrong.
Yeah,
Just the basic idea of what's the right way to live. Guess what? We all should maybe be going to church. I don't know. Think how that destroys our elites think about the world.
right.
Like,
No, I mean, I'm not, as I assume you may be a person of deep faith. And I think it would be better for me if I were. I'm not an atheist. I probably was at one point. I've totally thrown that out because I
I
think
was.
it's a it's a, it's a non-starter.
Mhm,
It's a ridiculous notion. I'm sorry. I
mhm.
don't care how many mathematical equations you put together for it. It just doesn't go anywhere
As if
for
math
me.
is what this is about.
No, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can't
Yeah.
really prove it, whatever. But I do agree that if there were those institutions that connected us to our community and to each other, if they became something eh, fashionable again or required again, and not by law or anything, that would be good. And
It would
I
be
think that
inspiring for young people.
well, I
So
think that there is a movement among young people. I'm reading about it in certain places, and I'm also seeing it with some young people I know that they're becoming Catholics,
yeah.
and people who weren't even raised Catholic. Like I have a granddaughter who's always been a person of faith, and she is probably going to convert to Catholicism. And
Interesting.
also, young women now going to church and wearing is it called the mantilla? They're
Mhm.
starting to
Yeah,
veil. They're
yeah,
because people are hungry for ritual that
yeah,
gives their life meaning, instead of just consumerism and TikTok. I'm
yeah.
hoping that there's a shift away from that organically because I don't know how we're gonna do this top down.
Right. Well, we also see that from inside. We're sort of surprised at 2 sorts of phenomena, which is the number of people who are converting, which
Inside the church or inside the
yeah, yeah,
university?
just
Inside
just
the
just
church.
within the church, but also why they're converting and what they're interested in. So, you can imagine 2 kinds of church. One would be kind of an open, loving, welcoming, we're gonna sing pop music and we're gonna have guitars and so on. That doesn't seem to be it's all that is designed to attract modern people. It
Right.
doesn't work. What what modern people want is the tradition, the smells and the bells, as we call it, the ringing of bells and the incense and these
Oh,
sorts of things, and it's because just, you know, what is it when you go to church? You're recognizing that there's more truth in the universe than what you can see in front of you. And you don't really eh, this is a slight off thing, but I also in studying video games, it struck me that good and evil are still serious categories in video games. They aren't in the real world, right? I've spoken to people and they're like, "I don't believe in the concept of evil." Well, let me show you some gas chambers. But but, if you really have encountered evil, let's say you had something horrible happen in your family, and then you go out in the world, it's like, well, all people are nice and everything. Well, Jesus didn't say that everyone is nice. That's not and if you go into a church that is very clear, here's all the things that are bad. These are all evil things. And okay, that can be comforting, even if some of that is turned on and actually you do evil things.
right.
So, it you know, it I think it's a much more uplifting approach to the world. Whether or not you believe it, of course, is a different question, but certainly it's good for people and good for society too. I
Oh, I
firmly
agree.
believe that if everyone became a Catholic tomorrow, we'd all be a lot happier. I honestly believe that. I don't know if it's true, right? I'm not arguing that it's true, but I do think we'd all be happier.
Well, I think and I can see why you would think that. I think that if everybody started to have some kind of framework for moral and right behavior and
Yeah.
not
Mhm.
excusing everything and,
Yeah.
and it's easy to see how it all happened. This is not the direction at all that I thought we would discuss, but I think it's terrific because
Well,
these are all the questions on my mind
yeah, I'd like to
all
say
the
something
time.
about Dewey in this context,
Yes,
my book,
yes.
because my book is like, "Oh, they're Catholic, they're Catholic, they're Catholic." But at the end, I make the point that the same dynamic could happen with anyone who's committed to something higher, like you
Yes.
just said. Worship of nature, worship of the universe, uh, devout Muslims, Orthodox Jews. I think, Protestants who are very, very serious about their faith. So this really, although I'm being kind of, uh, you know, totally Catholic right now, I think what you said is the real truth. Is that people having a commitment in a community to something higher.
Yes, and something an agreed upon reality, and I think
Yeah.
that a part of what's happening in our society is everyone's being atomized and fragmented.
Mhm.
The
No
family, the
wonder.
individual, we're all and it's the algorithm is, like, pushing us that way, and that's another topic, on, how do you manage that, especially for kids who are coming
Yeah.
up at this, and, one question I wanted to ask you is, you do play video games. You clearly think there's real value in play and gaming, and you see real economies there. And I was reading an interview you did talking about, and this is such a simple concept, it never occurred to me that things are fair in a video game because everyone comes in with the same amount of gold or the same amount of
Mhm.
cash. Like rich kids don't come in and all that. And that was interesting to me. But how do you manage kids in video games as as a parent? Like, what's the right balance? Are there certain boundaries that one shouldn't cross in terms of the content of a video game?
Yeah.
How do people like my kid, he played some, he wasn't he like we talked earlier, he was a Magic the Gathering kid in person.
Right.
So he
Right.
and his friends, his nerdy friends played cards,
Mhm.
with a lot of Latin words on them, a lot of strategy. It was
Mhm.
great. They
Mhm.
played some video games and they still
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
But I see kids in my family who are much younger who can't get off the screen.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wish there was an easy answer. There isn't. So first, I've talked to people about this and thought about it a lot. So number one, let's talk about content. I don't think you have to worry about content in video games. Content on YouTube is much worse.
Oh,
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's just that used to be
Yeah,
a
that's a good point.
I think the real issue with video games is it's time. It takes away time. And, I did a strategy, I don't think I would do it again. I argued with my wife. I was like, they have to learn how to break themselves of the habit." And so we had, like, these fixed times. You had to be done by 6 o'clock. Don't start a new game at 5:45 because I will unplug the thing. And thanks be to God, they both broke their addictions to they each were addicted to this game, League of Legends, which is a fantastic game. I could see why you and so actually that's a segue to the other thing. There are good games. You just use your parental judgment to decide, like, that game is just junk. But, like, a game like Minecraft is just a huge Lego set. Go ahead, you
Yeah,
know?
I always loved that, for the kids because they
But
built things and
it's sorta like the video games make children into the kind of child who's obsessed with something. So imagine if you had a child who was obsessed with butterflies. Eventually, you'd have to say, "There's a limit, okay? You've been out in the backyard for 12 hours with your net. You have to come in." So there's that. So there's,
yeah.
preventing obsession. But I think today, I might just say, you're not gonna get a smartphone until you're 19. You're not even gonna go on a computer, or we're not gonna have consoles here because I think, the ways are starting to divide, and I would want my family to be the family that survives all this, where they go and keep having children the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good point, the ways are starting to divide. And the smartphone thing, we would not let our kid have a smartphone till a couple years after his friends got them, and boy, was he
Right.
mad, and now
Oh,
he's 25, and he thanks us all the time, and he has no social media, so
my son went to a school called Wyoming Catholic College, which is sort of they do outdoor stuff, like weeks of backpacking, and then there's the
that's
religious part.
great.
But here's the thing, there's a policy there. When the kid arrives, they give up their cell phone. No cell phone until December.
Oh,
And
they're
so
probably
it's a whole
so
community of young people living without phones.
how fabulous.
And
Wow.
they all understand, like, this is a gift. This wasn't a restriction, it's a gift.
Well, we're at an hour, and I know you have a time constraint, and
Yeah,
I just wanna make sure I get a couple of things, in. What do
sure.
you think AI is gonna do?
I think AI and the
How's that
timeline
for a
doesn't
broad question?
it's good because, these kinds of questions are always like, "Well, with what time frame?" I'm very convinced what it's gonna happen over the next 4 or 500 years. But it's happening so fast, it might do that next week, or I think AI is going to become a very, very good worker and entertainer. I think there are huge parts of the economy, jobs that are absolutely at risk.
Mhm.
I think it dramatically changes how you would raise a young person. When my kids were growing up, I was like, "You really need to learn STEM and coding," and no, no, AI
Yeah.
is taking all of that. So learn leadership, learn character, because I think AI is just going to take over so many white collar jobs. Um, then supposedly robotics is going to come, but there's a real issue. AI is going to come, and then robotics, which is going to supposedly make everything cheaper. If there's a delay there, we could have tremendous, just crushing inequality. Um, so I think AI is going to be incredibly disruptive. Everything I see from day to day to day, I don't hear people saying, "Oh, it's actually slowed down." It's not slowing down.
What
So,
do you think humanity has a chance?
yes, humanity, absolutely. I think there's a wonderful I'm excited about the future of humanity. Imagine,
Good, tell me
we
more.
we were not supposed to live in massive cities. Fertility is going to drive people who spend their lives in chairs are not gonna have children.
Yeah.
The population is going to absolutely collapse, leaving all the wilderness, the whole world for those who just don't wanna live in computers. And those will be wonderful, just think, well, people go back to farming, they'll be raising their own food without the misery because they'll have access through the internet to all the knowledge. So if someone presents with rubella or something,
Mhm.
well, the doctor will be able to go and find out what's the cure for rubella and cure it. What's the right way to harvest peas? People will know these things.
Mhm.
And so I'm actually it's like we're gonna get out from under industrialization. The sad thing is all the people who go into the internet and don't have children, but I think they'll be happy. They'll be glad. "Oh, I'm fine." "Do you wanna get out of your chair?" "No, no, I'm more happy here than out there."
Mhm. Mhm. Well,
So,
there's nothing to be done for them, perhaps.
yeah. I mean, what are you
Um,
gonna do? Just take away their autonomy and drag them out of the chair?
well, that's it. You can't do that
Maybe.
either. Um,
So,
so
people just have to decide, "Do I wanna live in the chair? Do I want my family to live in a chair? Or do I wanna look forward to this future where it's small communities of basically farmers and ranchers, living off by themselves?"
yeah, that's what I want for sure. And
Mhm.
if I were a younger person, my husband and I talk about this all the time because we're not, if we were younger, we would go and forge that. And
Mhm. Me too.
and my son, he works on Wall Street,
Mhm.
and I hope he gets to the point at some point where he says, "Yeah, maybe I want to do that too."
Mhm.
Because I think
Mhm.
it's a good way to live. I grew up in a small town, and I have nostalgia for that
Well,
time for
think about
sure.
how the human person is supposed to live. How are we supposed to live? We're supposed to live in the freedom of nature,
Yeah.
and that possibility is coming again.
Well, on that note, it's such an optimistic view. I don't feel that way every day, but
Mhm.
I'm gonna take a little of that with me. I'd
Okay.
like to have you on again because there are more questions I want to
Oh,
ask you. But so before then, though, like where can people find you? Do you have a Twitter or any kind of blog or website you'd like to have me put in the show notes?
so if you look for Nuthatch, Nuthatch 9S. So it's Nuthatch 9S. That's my Twitter handle,
Hmm.
and I tweet about the novel, AI in the novel. I have a website, edwardcastronova.com, with periodic updates. I would say that if people want to, keep track of what I'm up to, that's it.
Well, great, because I think you're up to a lot of interesting things when I was researching you for this interview. One other question.
Hmm.
Where are you on the novel? Are you going to, do you see it being
Ugh.
published in any foreseeable future?
Well, so I have it out with an agent right now, and with people such as yourself, sort of
Hmm.
alpha readers. I'm getting good feedback. So I think it is publishable, but I understand it's very difficult for a new novelist to publish something. So I'm going to have it edited. I'll pay for an editor,
Hmm.
hear back from my agent. And my idea is, again, I don't need anything. So if a publishing house doesn't pick it up and I'll just put it out on
Hmm.
Amazon at
Well,
cost. We'll see what
I,
happens.
I hope it gets published and widely read because the core storyline has really stayed with me.
Really?
In yes, in a way that
All right.
yeah, it was just such a delightful surprise. It
Well,
really
I mean,
was,
I'm
and
so glad to hear you're such a sharp cookie, and
oh,
I'm
God bless you. Because when you're starting something new like this, you don't feel so sharp.
no.
But that's like the cool thing about being human. If you just don't have to fold your tent because you're older or whatever. You can just always do something new and learn
Mhm,
something new.
mhm,
And, that's why I think it's so important for people to do things, actually do things and not just rely on AI or, the
mhm,
virtual world
mhm.
because it's such a good exercise. And when you achieve something, it's
Yeah,
yours. Yeah.
yeah.
So, well, it was so good to talk to you. And thank you for opening my mind to so many things,
Oh,
Ted.
my pleasure. Thank you for those
And
questions.
yeah, and I'll be watching with great interest what happens at IU for sure,
Mm,
and the arc of your book. So keep me posted.
okay.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
talking to me today.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.